Welcome to Lesson 2-1, Adding and Subtracting with Decimals. Right, so our objectives for today, I will be able to add decimals, subtract decimals, and solve problems involving adding and subtracting decimals. Alright, so some vocabulary before we get started. An addend. So just like the dividend was the number that was being divided, addends are the numbers that are being added together in an expression or equation. So both numbers are actually considered the addend. So in this case, if I do 12 plus 16, both 12 and 16 are addends. And then sum. Sum is the answer to an addition problem. So when I do 12 plus 16, the sum is 28. Notice that I didn't say that 16 was a sum, and the reason that it is not a sum is because I had subtraction in this problem. So it's not a sum because it is not the answer to an addition problem. All right, so moving on. When we're adding and subtracting whole numbers and decimals, what's the most important thing to remember? You have to know your place value. If you don't know your place value and you don't line up your numbers correctly, you are not going to get the right answer. So for example, if I were to have 150 plus 96, if I don't know that 6 is in the ones place and 9 is in the tens place, and that 0 is in the ones, 5 is in the tens, and 1 is in the hundreds, then I won't know how to line up my numbers. Typically, we just look at the last number and line up each of the last numbers, and that works when we're working with just whole numbers, but now we're including decimals. So if I don't know my place values and I accidentally line up my numbers like this, now all of a sudden I've changed the value of the 9 and the 6. Instead of being worth 90 because it's 9 tens, I've now made this worth 900 because I put it in the hundreds place with the 1. So I have to make sure that I know my place values and that I line my numbers up appropriately. All right, so moving right along with place value helps us to know how to say our numbers as well. And this is really going to come in handy when we start talking about converting between fractions and decimals. So what we do is we take a look, and usually, so if a number is in the thousands place, we usually say 1,452. And that's just typically how we say it. We say after hundreds place, we end up saying all the place values. Well, that's not how it works with decimals. With decimals, we just say where it ends. So the 8 in this case, so I can actually, let's line it up here. So I have a 1, and then the decimal, and then the 8. So the 8 ends in the tenths place. So since it ends in the tenths place, we say the whole number that's in front. So 1, the decimal is read as and, so it's not point, it's and. So this is 1 and 8 tenths because the tenths place is where it ends. All right, so let's go ahead and try the next one. So we have 0, we do say the 0, 0 and 2, again, ends in the tenths place, so it's 2 tenths. All right, and if you want to try, so you should be writing these down, so write down the numerical version of it and write down the word form. So standard form, word form. Standard form is when it's written in numbers, the way we typically see it. And if you want to try these next two on your own, you can go ahead and do so. So we have 21 and 7 hundredths because it ends in the hundredths place. For the decimal place values, you'll notice they're pretty much the same as the whole place values, but they have THS behind them. And the reason for that is because they're parts. So when we talk about 1/4, we say fourth because it's a part. So 1/10, it's 1 out of 10. It's a part. We don't have a whole, we have a part. Okay, so the THS should clue you in to the fact that this is the decimal. Right, and the last one, 16 and 52 hundredths. So we still read the number the same. This is still 52, but it's 52 hundredths because it ends in the hundredths place. So what this number is actually worth, if you look at it as a fraction, is 16 and 52 hundredths, 52 out of 100. So that's actually what a decimal means, and typically we're used to seeing fractions and understanding that this is a part. So this and this are actually the same. They mean the same thing. This is just decimal form and this is fraction form. All right, so we also need to be able to go from words to numbers. So here I have 4 and, so that tells me that I need to have the 4 and then a decimal because it's 4 and 12 thousandths. So since it's thousandths, I look at my place values. This is tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So my number needs to end in the thousandths place. So the 2, because it's 12, has to be in the thousandths place. 1 is in the hundredths place, and then we would put a 0 here as a placeholder. So even though this 0 is here, we don't say it. It's not 4 and 0 12 thousandths. Nope, we just ignore it. Just like we don't say the 0 in front of the 4. It's just a placeholder. All right, so then 13 and 9 hundredths. Again, the 13 tells us we have 13 and, so 13 goes in front of the decimal. 9 hundredths, so tenths, hundredths, so 9 goes here, and since there's no other piece, 0 again becomes my placeholder. So here I have 0 and, so 0 and 7 tenths. Well, tenths is right here, so that works out perfectly. Here, 11 and, so 11 and 16 hundredths. So tenths, hundredths, 16 ends in a 6 with a 1 in front, so I'm all set. Okay, again, always make sure to take your time, and if it helps you to make these little lines with your place values, make sure to do that because we want you to understand it first and then take the training wheels off as you go. Okay, so to add these numbers, just like we said before, place value is extremely important because here you'll notice you have 9 and 7 tenths, 9 and 7 tenths, 9 and 3 tenths, 9 and 45 hundredths. So if I line this up incorrectly, I could be adding something that is a part to a whole number, or I could be adding something that's worth 1/10 to something that's worth 1/100th, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so our first step when adding and subtracting decimals is to line up all the decimals. So what that means is we're taking 9 and 7 tenths and we're taking all the decimals and they should all be lined up. By doing that, we've lined up all of our ones place numbers, all of our tenths place numbers, and then all of our hundredths place numbers. Now this seems awkward because it's off to the side, but that's okay because 5 hundredths is by itself. There's no other number that has a value in the hundredths place, and that's okay. We're going to show you how to work with that. You actually do the same thing when you're adding with whole numbers, you just don't realize it. So if you think you know the answer to that, we'll talk about it in class. All right, so you have the second step, which is fill in the blank spaces with 0. So these blank spaces here that seem awkward, we put in zeros for. Now it looks a little bit nicer and it's easier to add, which is our step 3. Now here's the thing, you can add or subtract first and then do step 4, which is bring the decimal straight down, or you can bring the decimal straight down and then add and subtract. So 3 and 4 are actually interchangeable. So you can do either of them first, and second. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add and subtract. Okay, I get 5. 7 and 3 is 10. Plus 7 is 17. Plus 4 is 21. Carry the 2. 9 times 4 is 36. Plus 2 is 38. And I bring the decimal straight down. Again, I had this completed, so what you might want to do is make sure that you get the right answer and practice it, but for the intent of this portion, you can just write it down and know how to bring the decimal straight down. That's our main focus for this problem. All right, so then moving on, we're going to try a couple of them together, and then you are going to be set on your own to try and not only add and subtract the decimals, but then to also name them. So we have tenths and tenths, so we need to make sure those two are lined up. So I have 1 and 8/10, and then I have the decimal, and to the left of the decimal is 0, and to the right is 2, and I'm adding them. So I'm going to bring my decimal down first, just so I know where my numbers are supposed to go and to keep them aligned. I have 10 from 8 plus 2 is 10. So then I have 1 plus 1 is 2. So my answer in this case is 2 and 0/10, which is also the same thing as saying 2. All right, so now let's try 21 plus 16 and 52/100. Notice 21 doesn't have any numbers after the decimal. It doesn't even have a decimal. Well, just like any sentence, your period goes at the end. So your decimal is just like a period. It goes at the end of a number. So that tells me that my decimal would line up here, and I line up the 6, which is in the ones place, with the 1, which is in the ones place, then the 1 that's in the tens place with the 2 that's in the tens place. And then you have 52/100 that have nothing above them. Okay, so that's where you add in the 2 zeros. And now you can add, because adding these 2 zeros to the end does not change the value. So it's like saying $21 is the same thing as $21. They both mean the same thing. Here you just added the decimal and your cents, and here you did not. And now we go ahead and add and subtract like normal. So 0 plus 2 is 2. 0 plus 5 is 5. 1 plus 6 is 7. Carrying. 2 plus 1 is 3. Bring your decimal straight down. So my answer is 37 and 52/100. Right, so now it's the same thing with the 4. We have 4 and the decimal goes behind it, so we have 4. And I have one place after the decimal, so I want to add 1 0. I can add the zeros before I line them up. And then I have 0 and 7/100. And now I go ahead and subtract. And I get 3 and 3/10. And then to double check, I can always take my answer and add what I subtracted, and I should get my first number. So 3 plus 7 is 10. Carry the 1 is 4. Bring down the decimal, and it worked. So now I have 13 and 9/1000 minus 11 and 90/100. Again, we need to add that extra 0. And then we subtract. 9 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. I can't do 0 minus 9, so I borrow from the 3 and it becomes a 2. And then I carry over, so 10 minus 9 is 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, and I bring my decimal straight down. Now I don't keep this 0. Typically we just don't write anything, but I want you to get used to seeing this because when we multiply and divide, you're going to end up seeing these extra zeros. So my answer is 1 and 109/1000. All right, so now we're to the you try portion. So now what you need to do is you need to write the numbers in words, and then find the sum or difference. So we read this one before. I know this is the same example that we did together, but that's okay. So this one, you would write it in words. So 1 and 8/10, 0 and 2/10. Then you would go ahead and you would line up your decimals, do your addition, and get your answer. As always, if you have any questions, be sure to email me or write them down so that way we can go over them in class.